I was kind of missing that feeling, which was my first alarm. And then I started to develop this gyno after the 4th week, because guess what, I'm using a cyprinate. So after 4 or 5 weeks, that plasma level starts to peak, and potentially serum estrogen starts to peak as well.
What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about Josh Bridgman. I got gyno using steroids. This is how I'm going to fix it. So Josh Bridgman is I believe UK based bodybuilder, and he has been pretty transparent throughout his bodybuilding journey and documenting it on YouTube. Kudos for the transparency, and he is a good, I would say like a pretty good source of information as well as entertainment in this industry for this stuff specifically, especially. You can basically follow his journey to like an IFBB pro card, and then, you know, him in his endeavors and competing, and his trials and tribulations, including getting goddamn titties, bro. So I got a gyno. How I'm going to fix it. Let us get into it here.
This year is about pursuing something great. This year is about the dream that I've had for as long as I can remember. I done did it. I done did got gyno. After all these years, 3 years, 3.5 years of priding myself on never getting it, I got it. Maybe to no fault of my own, and we will explain that through this video, but I got it. I got fucking gyno. We just kind of look at, obviously as you do as you get leaner, you kind of look at your physique a little bit, and I just look.
So hopefully you guys can hear it. Like, I'm standing right here and I can barely fucking hear it. Well, I guess the internal audio will be the same on your end, so I'll put in the high quality audio so it's not my mic playing. But he says he got gyno, maybe through no fault of his own, and you know, he's been cognizant of the risks of getting it this whole time, but I guess at this point he's just shocked he ended up getting it to some extent. Now the thing is once you start to get into the territory of IFBB Pro dosages and some of the polypharmacy that's going on, you have so many stimulatory inputs on breast tissue development that it can become hard to predict exactly how you're going to respond when you add in, like, for example, if you're pushing the growth hormone vector, that and IGF-1 downstream, stimulatory breast tissue development. If you're adding in progestogenic drugs, things that are agonizing the progesterone receptor, things that interact with prolactin, these are all things that are not like totally segregated from estrogen's impact on breast tissue development. You also have these other inputs that can also stimulate growth too. And concurrently all together, it could be like a 1 + 1 = 5 effect potentially, when you have everything checking all the boxes from an estrogen standpoint, from a IGF-1 standpoint, from a prolactin standpoint. All of these things have their own inherent stimulatory activity. And all you really have on the opposite side of the spectrum to inhibit this estrogen-induced RNA transcription at the receptor site is things like your androgen load. So to offset, you know, or inhibiting actual estrogen receptor activation, or lowering your stimulatory input via your GH dosages or whatever. Like for me, the closest I ever got personally was actually not when I was pushing test really hard. It was actually when I had, my stack had GH in it as well as MK677. I don't know why the MK on top of the GH was so problematic, but it, you know, and I shouldn't have, at the time it was like dumb to even be using, but it was, you know, I was doing like a hair experiment because MK for whatever reason is more conducive to hair growth than GH, as dumb as that sounds, considering it doesn't push IGF-1 to nearly the extent, and it's not nearly the bolus of growth hormone being pushed into your system. I don't know what it is, but it works better for stimulating like some of the cosmetic changes you would associate with growth hormone. And concurrently, with the estrogenic input, it was the thing that like pushed me over the edge, so to speak. And I think the only other time I actually was like way back at the beginning, I had done like test decade D-ball with no AI and gotten butt fucked, dude. And that was, fortunately, I'm like pretty gyno, like, I don't know, able to tolerate estrogenic load to a point that it wasn't that bad, but it was like the first time I noticed, I remember I was driving and like my seatbelt was like rubbing on my nip, and it was just the most irritating thing ever. Not normal, you know, if you have your seatbelt on your nip normally, like it's probably annoying, but this is like, you're noticing, it's like painful and very sensitive. You're like, holy goddamn shit, what is going on, dude? And then if you'd done your research, you would know what's going on. But if you're fucking stupid, you just keep running the test deco D-ball. But Anyways, let's see how he got to where he is. But it's understandable how even when you understand this shit, if you're being weary of, you know, AI deployment or SERMs and things that you otherwise might think could be potentially problematic for your results or for your health, maybe you're trying to like play this careful seesaw effect of not getting gyno but still not inhibiting health as much through inhibiting estrogen activity, blah blah blah, and then you might just end up, you know, overlooking it because you're in such a, I don't know, a deep bulk, for example, and some of the gyno is like shrouded in like, you know, tissue that is otherwise going to show how apparent your gyno actually is when you get shredded, and you weren't even aware it was developing this whole time. Like, there are a lot of, you know, insidious ways it fucking crops up.
I thought my right nipple's poking out and it looks a little bit swollen. And I thought, oh, it feels a little bit swollen, whether or not I was getting some out or not. And I did it, I grabbed it and I went, fuck, there's a lump there. I've never felt a lump under my nipple before. I've always like checked them, never felt sensitivity, never felt any lumps. And I got it and I was like, shit, little soft little lump. Fortunately it was soft, and we'll go into that a little bit. But this is my story over how I got it, and got rid of it in about 3 days. So panic is over. Let's get into the workout.
Yeah, did you say you got rid of it in 3 days? The fuck?
In about 3 days. So panic is over. Fortunately it was soft, and we'll go into that a little bit. But this is my story over how I got it, and got rid of it in about 3 days. How I got it and got rid of it in 3 days. So you don't get rid of a lump in 3 days. Maybe you decrease the amount it's flared up by, you know, deploying an aggressive SERM regimen of raloxifene or something, or deploying an AI and crushing shit, but you don't get rid of it. It's just less aggravated now, at least is what my perspective would be. But anyways, let me presumably jump to the part where he talks about it, which is, I would think, here.
400 milligrams of testosterone, 600 milligrams of Masteron, 100 milligrams of Tren. So in that cycle design, the Masteron's much higher, so we can modulate that androgen to estrogen ratio a little bit. I'm under the suspicion that the Masteron wasn't real, for one, because for being on that amount of gear, a gram, I wasn't feeling like I was on a gram of gear. Like, there's a feeling that comes with it, you know.
Okay, so when he says to modulate the androgen to estrogen ratio, like basically how I mentioned earlier, there are things that stimulate breast tissue development and there's things that inhibit it. And on the inhibitory side, you basically have like androgen load. So like DHT, for example, like the most potent, like anti-estrogenic fucking thing essentially for inhibiting estrogen-induced RNA transcription at the receptor, which would be in your breast tissue, inhibiting, you know, breast tissue development. And then on the pro side, you have, you know, the GH-IGF-1 axis, you have aromatization to estradiol, you have, you know, synthetic estrogens that are being created through your like fucking D-ball or whatever it is you're using. And you have prolactin, he's using Tren, a progestogenic compound. So when you deploy something like Masteron, like how is it giving, you know, like, if it's a, you know, more tissue selective compound than testosterone, which has a, you know, like a 1-to-1 anabolic to androgenic ratio, although those ratios are kind of fucking dumb to begin with. But anyways, it's like the most like neutrally actual non-selective compound, because testosterone is literally bioidentical. 5-alpha reduces to DHT, converts to estradiol, aromatization process. It's like the most it's the bioidentical compound that is like the most balanced in every way, but it is not more anabolic than it is androgenic, you know, proportionally. That's why anabolic steroids were developed to begin with, is to use in like androgen sensitive individuals like women, children. Like, these are things that every compound designed after testosterone was more tissue selective. So Masteron is not more androgenic than testosterone. It is something that is more tissue selective and more anabolic relative to androgenic. However, the way it facilitates its like anti-estrogenic properties is partially, seemingly significantly, through its competition for aromatase. It doesn't act as like an aromatase inhibitor necessarily. It seems to competitively bind and doesn't convert to any estrogen because it's not a substrate for aromatase that actually produces and spits out its own synthetic estrogen metabolite like you know, a dianabol, creating a methyl estradiol or something. Rather, it seems to occupy it to some extent and compete for it, but not actually convert into anything estrogenic, as far as I've seen. So you'll often see guys who use testosterone plus, you know, EQ, or testosterone plus Masteron, or testosterone plus Primabol, and their estrogen levels decrease on paper despite the fact that they're on more steroids It's because there's competition for the enzyme. So with him, when he's saying, you know, the androgen to estrogen load, you know, obviously the thing a lot of people would think is like, okay, well, why couldn't you just use like fucking, I don't know, like more tests? You would think it would convert, like you have testosterone and DHT. Like these are like the two most androgenic compounds ever. So wouldn't those in themselves like proportionally account for the estradiol you're producing? Doesn't seem to be the case. You know, the androgen to estrogen ratio, at some point when you're administering testosterone, if you're gyno prone, there's gonna be some level likely where you end up with unmanageable estrogenic activity whereby your androgens from the testosterone and downstream DHT are not able to deal with it, whereby you might end up needing to either lower your dose, you know, change your frequency of administration, switch to more synthetic agents that are competitive of aromatase and are not substrates themselves. You know, whatever the strategy is, like ultimately for him, he has this progestogenic activity from 100 milligrams of tren. He has 600 milligrams of Masteron though, which is literally competing for aromatase essentially. And then a reasonable dose of test that could be problematic in conjunction with the tren. The Masteron is essentially lowering your risk profile when it comes to gyno and, you know, estrogenic burden. And this is why it's, you know, commonly seen as like a pre-contest drug, is because it's like anti-estrogenic like properties, but you're not actually increasing your androgen load as much as you would if you were using like more test. So it's kind of like, the vocabulary on that is kind of hard to wrap your head around, because it's like, oh, well, like, why not use just straight fucking test or DHT even? You know, but Masteron is something that has its own, you know, anabolic properties, has its own neurological interactions through psychoactive effects and whatnot, and mind-muscle connections and stuff like that. But ultimately, its competition for aromatase seems to be quite potent.
An aggression, a fullness, a thickness, which I feel much more now. Maybe it's even more apparent. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit leaner, but also because I've swapped the Masteron out. And I was kind of missing that feeling, which was my first alarm. And then I started to develop this gyno after the 4th week, because guess what? I'm using a cyprinate. So after 4 or 5 weeks, that plasma level starts to peak, and potentially serum estrogen starts to peak as well, which just tells me that the Masteron either was not like 600 milligrams of Masteron, or it was something else, or half dose, whatever it is. Something that just didn't modulate my estrogen enough, and it's basically caused this. So my first point of action was to swap that Masteron out, because it wasn't real. I swapped it back to some Primo that I was using in my off season, which I know was real because I could feel it. I've been using that now for like my 9th day, and I feel the difference. You know, and I'm on the exact same dose, 600 milligrams of that as well. Just swap that out. Yeah.
See, that's the sketchy thing with UGL stuff, and is why, like, obviously it's easier said than done to be like, this is why you should just use pharma grade. But because certain compounds aren't made like pharmaceutical grade, and even if you were to get pharma grade, like, it's oftentimes not feasible for like an IFBB Pro who's using IFBB Pro dosages to get all pharma grade. But, you know, taking as much of a proactive approach to ensuring the legitimacy of the compounds you're using, especially through UGL, would be wise. I'm not saying this is easy to do necessarily, and having the connections and resources available to do this, but if you are able to verify the legitimacy of your stuff, you know, it would be ideal. And it seems like there are, just as there are UGL companies that provide anabolics that they create, there seems to be individuals who will also use like university equipment and labs and stuff in order to verify the legitimacy of compounds through HPLC testing. And, you know, it's worthwhile if you're going to be investing in UGL stuff through the actual acquisition of compounds, ideally only legally if it's available in your country legally, of course, that you also be lab testing them to ensure their legitimacy. If this is something you're doing as a professional long-term, like ensuring the actual sterility, the accuracy of dosing, the actual compound is correct in what you're using from a UGL would be prudent. So then you know you can actually stick with them and be getting what you're supposed to be getting out of it. But this is something very, very infrequently done, and it's kind of surprising for individuals whose entire like careers are based around their like legitimacy of what they're fucking using essentially. Like if your compounds are fake, it's not the right shit, like you might end up like ruining an entire like year of progress through the cycle you were using. Like who fucking knows, dude? So definitely would be, you know, an ideal thing to be doing.
That's going to further modulate my adrenaline ratio within 2 or 3 weeks, because it's an AMP molecule being primo building, so we had to assess the situation short term. For me, it was quite clear the the issue was circulating estrogen. So we immediately put aromasin in, which reduces that. Literally overnight, I felt the swelling come down. The next day, which is today, I don't even feel a lump. So it probably took 3 days for the lump to go, but there's just still like a minor bit of swelling there.
So I guess there's a disparity between like a flare of your nipple and it becoming like aggravated versus like an actual lump formation. So if you have a literal lump, like a nodule under the fucking skin, like the likelihood is high that that is some level of permanency. It's just to the degree by which it expands and fucking blows up and proliferates versus it shrinks down will be dependent on compound selection, estrogenic load, etc. But it's likely that it's there, but the cosmetic significance could be so small because it's so like non-aggravated that it's essentially unnoticeable, but the likelihood is high that it's still there, I would say. If it was like a legitimate fucking lump underneath. If it's just like the manifestation of it, where all of a sudden, like for me, when I was noticing, you know, my seatbelt like irritating my fucking nip, like that is the first signs of shit like occurring and starting to build up, but it's not necessarily like the lump itself being physically manifested there.
Which might take another week or so to go as my circulating estrogen comes down. I probably should and could have used relaxofen, whatever the fuck it is, or tamoxifen instead. It just so happened that I only had aromasin on me and I didn't want to wait a couple of days to attenuate the issue.
Yeah, so that's obviously understandable. The ideal scenario would be to attenuate it via a selective estrogen receptor modulator, because this leaves circulating estrogen levels intact, and estrogen receptors in your brain, your heart, etc. are ideally going to be left alone to a great extent, whereby you can still get estrogenic activity in those tissues, so you are not impeding your health just to modulate your gynecomastia development. You know, they bind with the ER and like selectively in the breast tissue is the idea, whereby you can then inhibit breast tissue development locally without actually fucking up other parts of your body. Whereas aromasin will just indiscriminately bind to aromatase, inhibit it, and prevent testosterone from aromatizing into estradiol, which thereby will crush your estrogen levels and allow you to, you know, modulate your androgen to estrogen ratio and lower your estrogenic burden overall. But it's a systemically not arbitrary, it's like a systemic kind of like indiscriminately occurring activity pharmaceutically, whereby it's like it doesn't care where the aromatase enzymes are that it's binding to and inhibiting, it is just binding to all of them, anything it can find. It's not a selective aromatase inhibitor, if there even is such a thing. It is something that just literally binds to aromatase and inhibits its activity and prevents estrogen from being formed, which will crush your estrogen levels fast and get the job done, but it's just like a less ideal way of facilitating it. But I understand why he wanted to get it done fast, and this is why it's good to have ancillary medications on hand that are, you know, useful from a like gynecomastia management standpoint. For example, like if you're a top bodybuilder or somebody who uses this shit, you know, recreationally, whatever the fuck, it's prudent to have everything you need on hand if you encounter this scenario. You know, having SERMs on hand if needed, having even like literal antibiotics if you have an infection. I'm not saying to do this all yourself necessarily. Obviously you should have an overseeing doctor who is, you know, an expert in this shit, but like I know some individuals who keep certain antibiotics on hand just in case they have like a fucking issue. Stuff like that I think would be prudent. But anyways, he is elucidating this so you don't make the same mistakes as him. And he's pretty on top of his shit. Like he understands this stuff very thoroughly, obviously, and knows kind of like what he's doing. Like more so than the average IFBB pro. Most IFBB pros just like, you know, have a guru tell them what to do and they're like, okay, and they fucking inject themselves.
I got straight into it and attenuated it myself. So that's my experience of gyno. That's my horrific experience, which is not that bad at all. People get it. People are more prone to it. I'm actually just not very prone to it. I've been very, very lucky. I've never had too much sensitivity at all. But generally speaking, I've been pretty good. Touch wood, that's probably why it's happened now. But that's some ways that you can attack it. And I would pressure you to do some more research before you take any of that advice. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you very soon. We're getting into the dog ender prep now, so we kick on.
So yeah, you know, again, he advocates doing your research, understanding the shit, and being careful, obviously. So it's, you know, again, I did the video the other day on the guy who ended up with brutal acne development. We've done videos on guys with, brutal hair loss, brutal gyno, brutal acne, brutal, literal fucking heart attacks. Like, there's so much stuff that can be occurring from this stuff that you need to be mindful of before you get into it. And I think, gyno, oftentimes goes overlooked too, because it is something that people often don't even really want to talk about when it happens to them. It's something that is embarrassing. You developed a fucking titty from your irresponsible use, It's not always the case though. Some individuals are so genetically predisposed to get it during puberty and they end up exacerbating with anabolics, like Noah Beck, for example. And then you get it surgically removed. And that is, to be honest, if you're going to be using this stuff long term, being ready to do a gyno surgery would probably be the best bet. Because ultimately, if you are super prone, now Josh obviously isn't, and he can get away with a lot of stuff. And for him, he just had, one bad experience with a compound that wasn't the right compound or dosed correctly or whatever, and it, caused this issue. But for some individuals who are really prone, can barely get away with higher than TRT level doses of test, you're not going to be able to do well in bodybuilding, in my opinion, in a healthy way. Not that it's healthy, but in attenuating your risk by letting your estrogen run the way it should, having cardio protection, neuroprotection effects and whatnot, the downstream effects on growth factors. You're not going to be optimally growing if you are constantly crushing your estrogen because you're so gyno prone, you can't even use a borderline super physiological dose of test. Individuals, I think, should have literally, I think it would be prudent to have a gyno fund saved up where you don't just slam yourself with AIs for your entire bodybuilding career. Rather, you just, fortunately, unlike a, hair loss and unlike acne, this is something that you can just get surgically removed and then, you don't have to take a bunch of fucking drugs to manage it at that point. Whereas, for hair loss, if you have, androgenic alopecia and miniaturization, you're not gonna be able to just reverse it fully when you continue to blast the shit out of anabolics, unfortunately. You can do your best, but the likelihood is extremely low if you're prone that you're gonna get away with it to any significant extent. To a degree, again, genetically dependent, of course. Acne, unless you're deploying a fuck ton of Accutane, if you're super acne prone, you're probably gonna get lit up. But with gyno, you can literally get the gland removed and probably avoid the excessive aromatase inhibition use that otherwise would have been necessary just to keep your blast going. So, keep that in mind, keep the risks of this shit in mind. I've done a lot of videos on gyno. I did one on, Joe Aesthetics and his gyno removal. I've done, several on the complications of anabolics. So check it out. Also check out Josh's channel, has a lot of good shit on it. Hope you guys enjoyed it, learned something. Thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplates.com. Follow me on Instagram, at moreplates.dates, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below, my preventative medicine, hormone replacement therapy platform. If you want to get connected with high quality doctors and medical providers who represent the same quality of information I try to put it on this channel and stay on top of all the cutting edge info on endocrinology, biology, pharmacology, etc. You can check it out as well as get access to self-service labs. We have a lab builder where you can create your own panel, or you can use the panels that are pre-designed and have been audited and approved by myself personally at a cost-efficient price point. As well, if you want to, and especially for bodybuilders, getting high sensitivity testing, super fucking prudent to not have cross detection with your synthetic anabolics you're using. These are things that are not touched on by other clinics that I've seen personally, and we are mindful of at our at Merrick Health. So you can check it out as well. Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode, pre-workout formulas designed from scratch, recommended diet model for gaining muscle, whilst being mindful of sports performance, micronutrient intake, gut health, etc. Definitely recommend it for newbies or intermediate guys who just want to learn how to hit a high quality diet, maximizing muscle as well as health through micronutrient intake and whatnot. Clothing company that sponsors me, anything else I'm associated with, hair loss prevention products, it's all in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.